Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Reckoning to Rise with the Center for Economic Inclusion. I'm Tawana Black, and I'm thrilled to be able to welcome you to this afternoon's Reckoning to Rise series. We're excited to talk to you today about women, money, and careers, and the opportunity that we have here to be able to strengthen racial equity, economic inclusion, and inclusive economic growth by addressing women, money, and careers. And we've got an amazing lineup today, an amazing conversation that's going to take place today. And I'm excited for all of you who are joining us both live in the room and who are joining us on YouTube for today's conversation. Welcome to Reckoning to Rise. Let's get right into our conversation on today. We want to start by thanking our sponsors who help us support this Reckoning to Rise series every month. We had a wonderful series throughout the entire month of February. Thank you to all of you who joined in for that series, and a big thank you to these sponsors who help us bring you this programming in each one of our convenings and workshops, and who have also stepped up to be able to sponsor our summit that'll come to you in June. We're grateful for all of these investors, and we welcome all of you who might be thinking about sponsoring and participating and partnering with the Center for Economic Inclusion to expand this programming to many more people throughout the country. A big thank you to these sponsors and partners. We also want to, as we do each time that we come together, engage you in an opportunity to poll and engage us in a little bit of information about you. So let's start and now have a few questions to find out who's in the room. You have an opportunity now to let us know a little bit about who you are, where you're joining us from, how you show up in the world, and we'll have an opportunity a bit later for you to tell us more about how you're using this information that you gain in each one of the Reckoning to Rise series, workshops, and convenings in order to inform your work in the places and spaces where you show up to be able to drive inclusive economic growth, how you're transforming the organizations that you work in, and how this information, how the connections that you make each time that you come together with us are helping you make decisions every day to move from awareness to action, to shared accountability in closing racial wealth gaps and building economies that work for everyone. We'll give you a few moments to be able to complete this polling, and we'll be able to share these results with you a bit later. We also, while you're taking this poll, want to remind you to be sure that at the very end of today's session that you make sure that you take a moment to use the link that we'll provide you to take our survey. We use these results in both the poll and the survey at the end of each Reckoning to Rise series to inform all of the workshops and programming that we offer here at the center. Your voice counts here, and we want to be sure that you use these options to be able to give us feedback about the programming that you experience with us. Thanks so much for taking an opportunity to participate here in this on today. All right, I think hopefully everybody's gotten a chance to be able to respond to that polling. We also want to give you an opportunity to be able to, as you see those results coming up now, thanks. It looks like we've got a very diverse room as always. We appreciate seeing both the racial and ethnic diversity that is in the room on today, as well as the gender diversity. We've got a pretty good spread here on today. It's great to see multiple generations who are participating in the room on today. This means we have a chance to be able to learn from each other. We also see our gender identity in the room on today, and in particular, as we're talking about women in the economy on Equal Pay Day today, it's great to see so many women represented in the room. We want to see some men in the room too, who are often in positions to be able to make a difference about women and how we show up in the economy. It's also great to see, again, so many first timers who are in the room on today, participating in your first Reckoning to Rise series, but also so many people who, 19% who have participated in more than 8 of our convenings and events. So great to have you back here with us for Reckoning to Rise. And we see the responses from you about how you are using what you gained as a result of participating in various center convenings as well. So we've got folks who have developed new relationships and are using that insight and relationships and partnerships, folks who have developed new workforce strategies and relationships and partnerships, and folks who are also driving new economic development strategies and solutions. We've got a number of you who haven't had an opportunity to be able to use what you've gained yet, and we want to encourage you. We think everything that we use, every time we come together, whether we make a new relationship in the social environment or we gain a new idea, a new strategy, a new policy, This is all about driving new systems change in our organizations. And so be sure that as you come, you push us, so you ask questions in the chat or use the Q&A function. You connect with somebody in the chat or connect with one of our team members who are here at each one of these events too, to get what you need in order to go back and change your organizations each and every time that you come here. And if you have other ideas about ways that we can give you more tools to be able to use in your organizations, be sure that you give us that feedback when you take the survey at the end of today's event. All right, we want to be sure that you also take advantage of lunch from our vendors across the region. If you go to our website, you will be able to see a list of links to restaurants throughout the region who are owned by our Black, Native, Asian, and Latino communities. And we want you to take advantage of purchasing from these businesses, both today, but also in the future, of catering with these businesses, because if we don't buy local, we'll be saying goodbye to local businesses, and these businesses help keep our economy flourishing and growing. So please take advantage of doing business with most of these restaurants and restaurateurs whenever you can. We also want to encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to take today's conversation into the social media atmosphere, whether you're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or on LinkedIn, or even Instagram or any other platform, Snapchat. Take this conversation wherever you go. Share the YouTube link as well. This is airing live on YouTube, and encourage someone else to be a part of it. You can tag our speakers on today, our panelists, and tag the Center for Economic Inclusion as well, and hashtag R2R, or Reckoning to Rise, so that we can continue this conversation far beyond today and continue to engage with you about the aha moments, the ideas that you have as you listen to today's thought leaders and experts about how we move women, careers, and money forward, and the tips and ideas that you'll get from our author, our featured author on today, about ways that we can continue helping women use money wisely in our economy. Okay, we're going to move it quite along, and I'm going to introduce our topic for today and our featured moderator. I am excited today to be able to move out of the seat of moderator to a great friend and colleague who was featured last year on the platform of Reckoning to Rise, and this year is coming back in. But as a moderator, you know her well. If you listened to both KMOJ, or if you attended last year's Reckoning to Rise series, you got to hear her. And we love her in our community, not only for her expertise in community, but also expertise in financial wellness and advising, and for a commitment to seeing our communities prosper. And today is Equal Pay Day, but we know that the importance of this topic is important because equal pay is not equitable pay. While we're celebrating equal pay today, we know that that day shows up differently for each of the racial and ethnic groups. For Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, Women's Equal Pay Day is actually May 3rd, meaning that Asian American and Pacific Islander women are paid 75 cents for every dollar paid to white men. Black Women's Equal Pay Day is September 21st. Black women then are paid 58 cents for every dollar paid to white men. And Native Women's Equal Pay Day is not until November 30th, meaning that Native women are paid 50 cents for every dollar paid to white men. And Latina Women's Equal Pay Day is not until December 8th, meaning that Latinas are paid 49 cents for every dollar paid to white men. We're thrilled to have Nika Constantino as Vice President and Senior Financial Advisor at Merrill Lynch here to moderate today's discussion as we honor Equal Pay Day and discuss women and money and careers. Here to moderate this discussion as an expert in this field, because she brings Merrill Lynch's clients more than 15 years of financial industry experience and strategies that she's developed in helping clients manage varied investment vehicles to help clients manage and enhance their wealth and close these disparities. She offers wealth management strategies for institutions, nonprofit organizations, small and medium-sized businesses, and high net worth individuals and senior executives who have retired or separated from service voluntarily or involuntarily from employers. Nika also has active community service leadership. She is an appointed commissioner with the St. Paul Port Authority, a trustee for Hamline University, and sits on the board of directors for Regents Hospital. She is also a volunteer with the Center of Communications and Development and a former vocalist with the Grammy Award-winning musical group, The Sounds of Blackness. Lastly, she is also the host of Financial Fitness on 89.9 KMOJ FM radio, and we're thrilled to be able to welcome her as moderator for today. Thank you so much, Nika. You're on mute, Nika.
Well, that's important. Well, thank you so much. I couldn't be more honored and privileged to be introduced by the Center of Economic Inclusion's founder, CEO, and visionary, Devonna Black. So thank you so much for creating this space. Today is going to be a fantastic discussion. I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Candace Still Flippin. She is the Senior Vice President and Chief Communications Officer for Acuity Brands. She has a long list of professional accolades. She has been featured in amazing media. She's a TEDx featured speaker. In addition to that, she has been featured on CNBC. She is named one of the most influential Black executives by Savoy magazine. She is an author, a speaker, a coach, and a friend. In addition to that, she leaves a long legacy of mentees. So each one teach one. As she has climbed, she is consistently reaching back and pulling forward. And you will see that as a theme today of this panel of women that are winning. Each and every turn, they have all done their part to reach back and pull forward. She is a global communications expert, multi-generational workplace scholar, as I said before, a TEDx speaker, a best-selling author, and featured on Forbes, CNBC, CBS, and Today.com. Without further ado, Dr. Candace Still Flippin, thank you so much for joining us in today's conversation.
Thank you, Nika, for that very kind introduction and warm welcome, and I'm very grateful to be a part of the program today.
Well, I know that that doesn't do your bio any justice, but I want to get right to it. And thank you so much for having such an intimate conversation with us today. First thing I wanted to ask before I ask anything is, in this particular space, when you look at all of the things that we're confronted with today's theme, what is advice that you wish you would have had in the beginning of your career?
That's a great question. I come from a very fortunate background that, my parents were in the household and they instilled a lot of great qualities into us. But somehow in all the teachings, for me, financial literacy was not one that I learned early on. And it played, as I talk about in my recent book, it wreaked havoc on my career because I did not have a strong financial foundation. And we see that play out today with a number of students who leave college with a lot of debt. I certainly had a lot of debt when I launched into the world, and I didn't have the right tools. And so I felt like it delayed my ability to launch. Certainly not my enthusiasm or my ambition, but I think it set me back. I also did not have pay equity very early on in my career, and that was devastating to me when I learned about it. But I felt like that set me back in terms of my overall trajectory. And once I did learn something, I was able to course correct. But I don't think that my experience is all that different from others who launch, and particularly for women of color.
So what is your advice to those who are just starting out now? Today's theme is reckoning women of color, money, and the workplace. How do you reckon with all of the data that Devonna Black shared at the onset? When we look at pay equity as it relates to money, we know that there are so many issues, and it's not about a single paycheck, but about a cost really over a woman's career. That lost income for all women is $406,280. For Black women, we're talking about $964,400. That's dark, but what's the solution side of the equation to getting one's career in shape to get the pay equity that we're striving for?
The first thing I'll say is I'm an optimist, so I believe it's never too late to start. First, this problem should be addressed in a number of ways. So if you think about it, the policy level, there should be policies in place that allow for more inclusive places and equity in pay. That's good for communities. It's also good for business, and it's good for the people who live in those communities. At an organizational level, it's really about reconciling that the past was the past and what type of environment do you want to create moving forward for your organization, and to tackle and really to tackle and invest into making sure that there's equitable pay within your organization. Now, I've heard as a workplace scholar, people say, oh my gosh, if we kind of lift the rug and start looking at that, it's going to take us a while to course correct it. And that may be the case, but I would argue that that transparency is already existing in social media, where this information is widely available. Associates are talking amongst themselves about what their salaries are. And so it's important to get ahead of it. And then at the individual level, just like myself, that I had to learn, getting grounded and making sure that you have really good financial literacy skills and that you understand how you're using your money, how you're saving your money, how you're managing your money.
Now, you're an author. You've written a book several books, but I want to talk about one specific, which is about really getting your career in shape. What is the future of the multi-generational diverse workplace? Does it create new rules of engagement? How does change and all of this, everything that we've experienced the last 18 to 24 months kind of play into this new emerging dynamic?
Well, the first thing I will say is the future is bright. We're going to move past the pandemic and its effects on our economy and health, and we're going to enter into, based on what the census tells us, a very diverse future. It's going to be more racially and ethnically diverse. It's going to have more people who are first generation immigrants to our country. It's going to be younger in the workforce. There are far more millennials and Gen Z coming into the workforce than, for example, my generation, which is Generation X. And it's going to require that we look for other types of communication interventions to make sure that we're building bridges. In my research, I've seen a shift from how baby boomers or Gen X like to communicate versus millennials and Gen Z. So the reason why I focus on communication is because we spend as adults 70% of our time communicating, whether we're reading, we're talking, we're listening, we're writing. So it's an appropriate bridge in my mind to help bridge those gaps. And in my research of approximately 1,400 individuals, I learned that for baby boomers, when you're communicating, whether it's a strategy or working on a project, they really tend to favor active listening, making sure you're paying attention so you're not looking away or looking at your device or doing something else, that you're really grounding yourself in that conversation. And those conversations tend, for better or for worse, to be more one way, and they're focused on listening and maybe not asking as many questions, according to my research. For Gen X, we're focused mainly on collaborating, working in teams, and that makes sense because when we came of age into the workforce, globalization started to really take off. We were starting to just using emerging technologies to talk to people who may not be in the same location. However, for millennials and Gen Z, they resonate towards empathy, making sure that you're looking at the human factor as you're interacting and exchanging information. And if you think about that, that's probably why we're seeing a broader focus in the younger generation on wellness and prioritizing mental health. And so that shift, think about it, you're going to have a much more diverse workforce. You're going to have a workforce that may be newer to in their family lineage, legacies in this country. And then at the same time, you're going to have people who want to communicate differently. They don't want it to be as transactional. They want the whole person to be considered in the work experience. And in my opinion, based on my research, what it's going to do is humanize the workforce, and we're going to have to reconcile that these expectations are going to be important. The other thing that I'll say is more and more people want to bring their whole self to the workplace. And I think back to when I joined the workforce, there was an expectation that when you walked into an organization or a company, you pretty much assimilated to that culture. And whatever that cultural norm was, that's what you assimilated to. So, whatever your other identity was, you left that at the door when you moved into the organization, and you had to double down on that culture to be able to ascend in that organization. And that was expected. What we've seen now is a shift where people want to bring their whole identity into that experience, and they want that identity to also shape the culture. And I would say that those organizations that embrace that philosophy or that mindset will create an environment where the best people will come and do their best work.
So how have you captured that? How have you adopted that? Is it different for women of color? Is it a different challenge? Is it a different struggle?
From my personal experience, I was fortunate that I had amazing mentors when I was coming up. But I will say that I, as I started my career, did put part of my identity on the back burner. And so I would say that my conversations about things that I did were much more mainstream because I had this perception that that was more accessible to me in terms of being able to be included. Where there were things that I was doing that were very unique to my culture as a Black woman that I didn't openly share. It was really, I would say, as I became in my late 20s, early 30s, when I started to reconcile for myself that I had to be my authentic self to be able to do what I needed to do. And so I started teaching. So when people would ask what I did this weekend, if I did something that was culturally specific to me, whether it was an organization like a Black sorority that I was a part of or a social organization, I would share. I would explain to people what that meant. If I went to a Juneteenth celebration, I talked about what that was and why it was important to me. I invited my coworkers into my home and to expose other parts of me. And I came to appreciate that it wasn't me being excluded. They just didn't know. And as they started to appreciate it more and more, I could have more inclusive conversations. I started to hire more people who look like me and speak with my HR partners to have people who look like me or look different than me, besides the majority, to be on the hiring slates. I volunteered to head up the Diversity Council. In my current role, I am the executive sponsor of our Pride employee resource group. And so I've pushed the boundaries to be present and visible where I am. But I will say that took time for me to come to because we weren't having those conversations throughout my career, which is why I'm so excited about my research and where we are now as a society, because those conversations are open now. And my hope is that for those who are entering the workforce and those who are managing people of color in the workforce, that there's more openness so that you can get an authentic experience for those individuals and get the best out of them and retain your talent.
Nice. I want to ask you a little bit about money because you talked about it a little bit. But for you specifically, what were the biggest challenges as you were navigating your career as a woman of color? And what have you seen in your research around issues as it relates to reckoning the pay disparity, the pay gap, and all of the other disparities that you've kind of uncovered in your research?
So I would say that, and I don't like to use the word victim, but I'll say recipient. I was the recipient of a lot of bias. And I remember when I was 23 years old and I worked for an organization and they had a 401k type program. And there was an older woman who worked within that organization who came to me and she said, listen, Candy, I know you're young and you think you have your whole life ahead of you. You should start saving some of your money in our program because the company will match. And I didn't quite understand it, but what she said is for every dollar you put in, they'll match a dollar. So no matter what the stock market does, you at least know that you're going to get at least, what you put in. That seemed easy for me. So I went to the HR office and I said, I'd like to sign up for our program. And he said, oh, you're only 23. You're going to get married. Your husband will take care of you. Don't even worry about that. You're good. And so if you read my book, you'll realize that, I was not the best with my money when I was in my 20s. And so that just said, oh, well, that's more money for me to play with. All right. And so I left. And I didn't think anything of it. And then some of you who are listening to this are probably like, oh my gosh, yeah, that happened to me. But here's what saved me. He had a secretary. And she came to me later that day and she said, oh, I hate when he does that. He only says that to the women. He never says that to the men. And she says, I'm going to be retiring later this year. And I wish when I was 23, someone had, encouraged me to save. And so she came and she gave me the paperwork so I could fill it out. And she says, you know what? Pay yourself and put as much money as you could in there. And had she not done that, those dollars would have never, ever been invested. And so I was a victim of bias very early on. And there were lots of examples of that throughout my life. And so what I will say and what I'm encouraging women to do is be your own best advocate for your financial future. Start whenever you can. And I don't believe that the advice that he gave me was in any way more than just his own bias that, women get married and their husbands take care of them. I don't think he was being, I don't think his intentions were necessarily, evil. That was just his own bias of probably how women came into the workplace and what was in store for him. He probably thought I'd get married and be a housewife and that would be my life. But the reality is there's always going to be some circumstance behind you or forces pushing against you. If you want to be able to move forward, I encourage women to build up their financial literacy and choose to make financial steps, regardless of how large or small those are, to make sure you're building a financial foundation. The other thing I will say, and HR people, maybe you'll have to email me after this, but encourage people who work for you if you have programs that allow for saving or financial health or wellness or wealth creation to exist, that you're ensuring that those people who report to you are taking advantage of them. Have that conversation as a part of it, because if people are first generation or they didn't have people in their lives who took advantage of these programs, they may not even know or fully appreciate how important it is. I remember at one point in my career, I had a manager and he gave me my bonus and he said, listen, you save this money. And I thought at the time when he said it to me, well, that was awfully personal. This is my money. I should do whatever I want to with it. But what he said is, listen, Candace, there are 3 things we have here that will make these dollars go further. And this was a white male. And I think he knew I didn't know or had a frame of reference to that. But thankfully, he told me that. And there was a multiplier effect on those dollars that I chose to participate in. But no one ever told me about it. And some people may say, well, when you join the company, then you get your HR package, but that's overwhelming. And if you don't have a frame of reference of what these things are, you don't quite know. And having a conversation, I think, is really important. Now, there are people who are in different generations where you say, you don't talk about money. And I understand that. What I would encourage people who are leading women and women of color or people from disenfranchised communities or populations to think of ways to give them this gift. It will be a gift that they can have for the entirety of their life and their career. And at the very least, giving them that knowledge will allow them to make strong and positive choices to help their financial future. And by doing that, here's how it plays out in the workplace. When you believe you have a strong financial foundation, you will take risks. You will raise your hand for that promotion, because if you are the primary breadwinner, which women are and women of color are in their households, then you won't be afraid to take that chance because you know that you have funds available to sustain your family while you try to figure these things out. You might explore your passions because you know that you can still pay your rent. You may start that business that you've been dreaming of because you know by pursuing your purpose, it won't put your family on the streets. And if something happens, like you find yourself in a global pandemic and your company closes, or something happens where you now have to go home and prioritize your family or yourself for self-care, it's not going to necessarily lead to financial ruin for you. So you can make that choice because you've taken care of what you need financially.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I just have two more questions. One, what you said kind of sparked isms in me, and I want to ask you a little bit about those isms. Women of color are existing in multiple identities at the same time. I am both Black and a woman. What is your advice for working at the intersection of racism, sexism, and all the other isms that exist? How do you rise in this reality?
I would say that you are living in a time where you can open the door and welcome yourself to have a seat at the table. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I will encourage all women, women of color, to walk in with all your identities. The research has shown that when you hide your authentic self, you are not bringing your best self to work. And whatever that is for you, whether you are a Black woman like myself, whatever your identity is, I encourage you to show up as yourself. You're going to enrich yourself. You're going to enrich those around you. And if you are in an environment where you can't do that, ask yourself if you're in the right environment for you and do something about it. If this were 5 years ago, honestly, I probably have an answer that would be similar, but not so direct. Because I believe that prior to 2020, we were talking about diversity and inclusion, but we weren't talking about the harmful impacts of racism and reckoning with that. And so many of us, because of the trauma that we've experienced, we've suppressed ourselves. And I believe it's been freeing to have those conversations and show up who you are. And I've seen people be welcomed for doing it and be welcoming. And so I would say that if that's where you are, at the intersection, open the door and walk right on in. Now, some of you may listen to this and say, Dr. Candace Stoveland, that's easier said than done. Every journey begins with that first step. And what I've seen in my research is that since 2020, more people want to know that what they're doing has purpose. They want to know that the work that they're doing aligns with what's important to them. But it doesn't mean that today I'm a lawyer and tomorrow I want to be a community organizer. It means that whatever time I'm putting into whatever pursuit that I am on, that I can do it in a way that's authentic and meaningful to me. At Acuity, we like to say we believe we can do good and do well. And I'm happy that we have that philosophy because I think it also extends to people as well. So just to kind of put a footnote on it, if you're a person struggling with your identity, I encourage you to welcome others to that and be your authentic self. If you are leading people, create an environment where they can bring their authentic self. And if you're uncomfortable starting that conversation as an individual or as an organization, seek out support and tips and tools to help you do that. The last thing I'll say is, there's been a lot of conversation about guilt. Maybe there's a certain segment of the population where they have guilt and you should tap into that. I don't subscribe to that. I seek to understand. And, if you're a part of this conversation today and we have a diverse audience here today, you get brownie points for showing up to seek to understand. And thank you for doing that. And what I encourage people to do after that is to think of ways where they can take this message and what you've heard forward And if you disagree with it, sit with it. Ask yourself why you disagree and have conversations. If you agree, pay it forward. But at the end of the day, I think that we're on a journey. We're on a journey as a society, and as painful as it's been in some places, we're going to come out the other side a better society. And as individuals who may have felt disenfranchised, as impossible as it may seem, we're going to come out the other side whole. And for organizations who are grappling with it, you're going to get better. Research shows that the more diverse organizations who have more insights to come to solve business problems perform better. And so there's a personal imperative to be authentic. There's a community imperative to lift everyone up. And there's a business imperative as well. So, from my perspective, everyone wins in this scenario, even if it does take some time on that journey.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I just have one final question for you as we go into the panelists, and that is and you touched on it a little bit, but how can you say more about how allies create a safe place for inclusion outside of the traditional checklist? So in other words, what does reckoning look like not only for women of color, but also allies in this space?
I would say the first thing you want to do is give yourself the gift of grace. A lot of the things that we are experiencing in our society, we inherited, no matter what side you were on. And so understanding that, the question becomes, what will you do about it? And here's what I've encouraged a number of my friends to do, and I received lots of calls in May of 2020. I said, the best thing you can do moving forward is to make a way big and small ways. So let's start with the small ways. Have you ever mentored someone who doesn't look like you to create opportunities? Mm-hmm. Have you ever sponsored anyone in your organization? Have you used the power of your influence and privilege to look across your organization for talent who doesn't look like you? Create that relationship and made a way for them. Have you ever done that? When you are hiring people to come into your organization, what conversations are you having with the sourcing manager, the hiring managers, or the HR partners, or yourself in terms of what that candidate slate looks like? And are you not making a decision until you have quality people whom you've talked to? Are you attending organizations and presentations like this one where you can learn and grow? And when you are ready, are you taking a leadership position within your organization in an authentic way to be a part of an employee resource group? Join an employee resource group. Create an employee resource group. And then think about ways that when you are looking around your room, if you are in a place and there's no diversity in it, what questions are you asking yourself to do something different about it? And if you make all of those great strides, here's what's important. When you reach out to do that, what have you done to make sure that that person you've brought into your circle is having a great welcoming experience? Because what I've learned is that a lot of times great intentions happen, and then we're brought into these environments, but we're not nurtured. So you say, Candace, we've opened the doors, we wanted a Black woman to come in, and I'm there, but then I'm expected to have an identity that's not my own. So making sure that it's a safe space for that person to show up and be welcomed with that identity. Those are great places to start.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Candace Pittman. And we're excited not only to have you here in this space, but also about your book. You've written several. Can you just tell us your most recent book and what we can seek to get from it?
Absolutely. And thank you for asking. So my new book is called Get Your Career in Shape. A 5-step guide to achieve the success you need, you want, and you deserve. And this book is a culmination of 2 years worth of research, both pre and during the pandemic, looking at women and what are the things that women do to hold themselves back in their career. And I've discovered 5 areas where women, if we address them, we can have better success. And it's all underpinned in the theory of self-efficacy, which is the belief that you'll be successful if you try something. So it's different than self-confidence, which is the belief that you can try. So the way you see it commonly playing out is a man may apply for a job and they look at something and they say, oh, I have about 50-60% of the requirements, I'm going to go for it. Where a woman will see that exact same thing, and unless her resume or experience matches 100% line for line, she won't even raise her hand and try. And so what I'm encouraging women to do is, 1, save your money by creating a strong financial foundation. 2, understand that hard work is subjective, and the most important thing you can do is be aligned with the person who's evaluating you. 3, learn how to advocate for yourself by speaking up and making sure you're heard. 4, understand, which is perseverance, understand how you can surround yourself with support systems to keep going when you have those highs, but more importantly, when you have the lows in your career. And then the 5th is educate, which really represents having a strong educational foundation so that you're a lifelong learner. A lot of women won't pursue an opportunity because they don't feel like they have the education and training. And so I encourage women to be lifelong learners and build that muscle so that when opportunity presents, you'll raise your hand.
Thank you so much. And that is a wonderful thing to lead with as we introduce the other 2 panelists, because they have done just that. I can't think of a better time to have over the lunch break than to spend time with these women who are winning in every area of their life. So I'd like to introduce Devonna Pittman, who held a work history with the county that spanned almost 2 decades, carved her own distinct path as a mother, as a friend, as a community leader and entrepreneur. She founded Nature Syrup, the Black Authors Expo, bringing her space to this time in this place where she is now the Director of Inclusive Growth at the Center for Economic Inclusion. Brianne Rothstein, a 15-year career in urban planning and economic development. Her career spans city planning, community development, business leaderships, and organizational management. She also found time to be entrepreneurial as well as a trainer and hired consultant, focused on equity and inclusion. I want to welcome these 2 amazing women winning to this space. Just to get reflection on what you absorbed from that which Dr. Candace Steele Flippin gave us just moments ago about getting one's career in shape. Welcome, Devonna Pittman, and welcome, Brianne Rothstein.
Thank you, Nika. So excited to be here with you all.
Well, we're excited to have you in this particular space. I am so thankful. Just wanted to ask you right off the bat, what is the advice that you would give your younger self as you hear and observe all of the things that Dr. Candace Steele Flippin said about getting our career in shape? How did you navigate this particular maze of life and career and family?
Gosh, well, I'll say that Dr. Candace mentioned so many of the opportunities that she wished she had had. And one of those was really knowing who you are, knowing your power, and really understanding that your voice can move mountains. There were so many practical nuggets, and I'm a practical learner and a practical leader. One of the things that Dr. Candace mentioned was not understanding or knowing the power of pay equity and how it affected her journey. Many women are in that place. It's also important to note that many young people are coming into the workplace, and some of them are choosing not to come into the workplace. So for me, if I could do it all over again, I'm not sure how long I would have worked for public sector, because I know there's so much work to be done in our communities. So I think that probably would have been one of the major changes for me. Dr. Candace also mentioned assimilation. And some of us have moved into workplaces, gone into workplaces, feeling like we needed to chemically relax our hair so we could relate to interviewers. That's one thing. Had I known or believed or even understood the power of my journey, I wouldn't have folded on that. So I could go on and on with just some of the examples that she shared that I 100% agree with.
Now, I want to ask you, she talked about reckoning with money as well. What is some advice that you would give to your younger self about money that you wish you had heard, or you wish you had paid attention to earlier in your career?
Absolutely. Investing. Investing is one of the most powerful tools available to us. But we come from an era where our families we're just trying to make it. And so there weren't those opportunities where you can take an extra $20 or $30 and invest it, because there was always something else that you needed to do, especially for young families. So understanding that money is a tool, it is a means to an end, and really figuring out how to make that money work for you. We were taught to, when I was growing up, I remember renting furniture. My mother rented furniture. And I remember Rent-A-Center coming to pick up a couch because my mom couldn't make the payment. And so I said to myself that day, I'm never going to rent furniture. I'm going to pay cash for everything. I'm going to make sure that I have the credit to get, and let credit work for me. And so those are just things that I recognized as a young girl, and they weren't necessarily told to me. Mama didn't say, don't rent this furniture or do this with your money. These things are going to lead to, or saving. We didn't understand the power of saving and investing. And so for me, just recognizing that money is a tool. It is not something that can be, for us, for many Black families, we've struggled for so long. It is so easy to just run out and take your whole paycheck and buy all those things, the glitz and the glamour, and not really thinking about what retirement is, what retirement looks like. How much money is it going to take for your family to live a decent life, or to even be able to live 50% of the life that you're living right now?
How did you get to the point, when did you get to the point where you were able to bring your full self to work? And what is your advice to leaders as they create spaces for multi-generational, diverse workplace, as they bring in kind of new leaders and raise up new leaders? How do you encourage our allies and friends to kind of accept new executives or people early in their career with their arms wide open? So you've given advice to those who were you in the past, right? To your younger self, but how do you give advice to the leaders who are influencing the younger version of you?
You ask, how do I bring my whole self to work? And I'll say that every day is a journey. And every day you make a decision about what you want to show in your workplace. The expectation that we all have to fit in rather than create this incredibly powerful, creative workplace where everyone doesn't think the same sets businesses up to prosper. We should be able to bring all of our funny, country, swagalicious, homegirl, and hood selves to the workplace, right? And everything else that we've learned along the way,
Absolutely.
Sorry, because many of us, Anika, many of us have degrees to back that up. That is what makes our organizations authentically amazing and places everyone in our organization as a secret weapon. When we start to determine what we think a workplace should look like, it removes all of our secret weapons. So,
I appreciate you for your honesty and your authenticity, and you've always been that way. What I know about you and what I've observed about you, I want people to know that are watching this today, this isn't a real fireside chat because my technology is down. So Devonna Pittman, not only Devonna, but Brianne have no idea the questions that we will be asking because of a technology issue. So I just want to thank you for your flexibility and your fluidity, but also your authenticity. You've always been that way in every single thing that you do. And I'm excited that you're in this space to open and create opportunities for our other people as they navigate. One of the other things I want to ask you as we talk about reckoning women of color, money, and the workplace, as you were working and building your career, you went off into different entrepreneurial ventures. When we reflect back on some of the things Dr. Candace said, how does that touch, move, and inspire a young person to do exactly that, to be able to build, but be flexible enough to attach and follow one's dreams along the path? How was that for you as you kind of navigated entrepreneurship and your career?
Yeah, I think for me, I have always been someone who will take a risk. In some cases, in most cases, I'm a risk taker. I actually called my mom right before this session to ask her if she remembers her great-great-grandfather. I know my grandfather was born in 1922. His mother, my great-grandmother, was born in the 1800s. So as you know, Black people couldn't legally read at that time. And my grandfather couldn't read. Before the gig economy was a thing, my grandmother was gigging. She owned a candy store and helped to support her 14 children. So my grandmother would bake cakes and put them in plastic bags. She pop popcorn and sell them on her back porch. So this is a story of many Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian workers. So I saw my grandmother gigging. My mother owned a barbecue restaurant when I was growing up. I saw my mother gigging. So let that be, the backdrop for the racial equity gaps that we see. That has resulted in so many years of structural racism and barriers that actually prevent families from prospering. And it actually, when we put women to work, this is the one thing that I want to share quickly. When we put women to work, we are setting them up for success and to be able to do all the many things that they love. You all know I worked for Hennepin County for 18 years. At Hennepin County, I had the pleasure of writing and publishing 3 books. I also started the Minnesota Black Authors Expo. These are things that I loved to do. But when you set Black women up, women of color up for success, you also position them to be able to set other people up for success. And so I know that because, and I don't know what the pay equity gap was at the county, but I do know that having that role, that empowering role, put me in a position where I felt like I could do more. And for me, that more meant not only becoming a business owner 3 times over, but also being able to pay college students pennies and dimes and nickels and quarters and dollars to help support my little gig economy job. So it's women have to feel empowered in their workplaces in order to create opportunities for other women.
Thank you so much. Speaking of creating opportunities for other women, Brianne Rothstein has been doing just that in the context of not only her career, but her entrepreneurial ventures as well. Brianne, are you there? I can't see you.
Hi. Hi, Nika.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't see you on the screen.
No problem. I know you're on your phone.
Well, right. I'm like, my whole technology just kind of went away here. But wanted to ask you what stood out from the conversation that we had with Dr. Candace Flippin, also Devonna Pittman. You have an interesting 15-year career in the public and the private sector. Reading about you is fun. You've been focused on inclusive economic kind of parity at the city and the county level, and then in the private sector as well. Talk to us a little bit about what stood out with what Dr. Candace Steele-Flippen shared, but then also what is your advice to your younger self in terms of women carving their own path as you have?
Thanks. So two things really stood out to me, both from Dr. Candace Steele-Flippen and from you, Devonna, is really the importance. I mean, Dr. Candace's story about the secretary and the importance of coming alongside other women. Peer-to-peer mentorship maybe is the formal name for that. So not just finding mentors or mentees, but peer-to-peer, talking to your friends, your colleagues about your journey, about your financial journey, about how to negotiate your salary, talking about your performance review coming up, just daylighting all those conversations that have historically been taboo or not really commonly discussed. I do think that that's also tied to the increase in the human-centered approach of workplaces. What we're trying to do at Brooklyn Park with our economic development program, really put the person in the economic development. Economic development has traditionally been about the built environment and jobs, but we're really trying to think about the people, the residents who live in our city, and how to economically develop them, right? Because that's really what the end goal is. And so that really stood out to me, the peer-to-peer mentorship piece, as well as Devonna, your comments on the gig economy are right on, right, very consistent with the small businesses and the entrepreneurs that we work with in Brooklyn Park. I think there's a very traditional sense of small business. I'm going to start a small business. I'm going to take out a big fat loan. I'm going to work for 2 years till my business cash flows. That's not what we're seeing in the small business community in Brooklyn Park at all. People are working full time and adding their side gig, their small business to the side, or they're working at a nonprofit and they're doing 2 or 3 businesses on the side. I mean, I'm so inspired by the people I meet and get to work with, and some of the ways we've tried to morph our programs to be more accommodating to that is rolling out a new micro lending program, an acknowledgement that our small business community doesn't necessarily need $100,000 or $200,000. They need like $1,500 or $10,000 to build some inventory or create a website or get organized with their books. And so being able to meet our small businesses in those spaces to really react to that gig economy has been something that's really, really been rewarding and fun. So those are the 2 things in particular that really stood out from what I've heard so far. What advice would I give my younger self? Probably both of those things, right? Talk to people, get advice about ask people what they're making. I know that's, again, such a hard thing to do, but how do you know? Ask your white male counterparts what they're making, actually. Your friends might be in a similar conundrum as you. So really developing those relationships to be able to be comfortable asking people their salaries, having daylighted conversations about that, I think is critical. And then exploring that gig work. Like, we don't have to fit into a mold of 9 to 5 or government worker, or we can leverage our skills and abilities beyond just what society kind of says is a 40-hour-a-week job. So those would be my 2 pieces of advice.
That's awesome advice. The other question I have for you as we transition back to Q&A is, what does transformational inclusion look like? You deal with it at the city and county level as you cascade that through housing policy. What does it look like at the city level? How do those things intersect? So what does transformational inclusion look like in 2022?
Well, I agree with Dr. Candace Steele-Flippen that the future is bright. We are really well positioned right now as a society, but also on the policy level and on the governmental level to see transformation. And what it looks like is, this has been discussed, but from my perspective, is inclusion in hiring, diversifying all of those places and spaces that we're doing work in. For us, it starts at the city council, and then department directors, and then managers and staff. And so the people making the decisions and the people deploying the work have to represent our community. So in working very closely with the Center for Economic Inclusion Trust, we've really made progress in that space. And then the second thing is not just to be inclusive, but to actually hear the voices and listen. And I don't mean listen like I can hear what you're saying, but listen like obey. Like when those diverse groups are coming up with ideas, do them. And I know it's a lot easier to say than I've seen it happen. Like there are people in our communities and on our staff that are constantly saying, this is what we need to do, and listening to those voices. So first getting people at the table, being inclusive, but then actually being responsive. So I think that's some of the things we're trying to do within the city, but also in all the groups that I'm in, participate in, whether it's board work, volunteer work, training, side gig work, listening and obeying those directives and those ideas, taking them and running with them is a critical part of it too.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you for your leadership, and I appreciate you for navigating inclusive spaces and as it relates to economic development, what you do in your private life and what you do for the city as well. Now we're going to open it up to question and answer. And so we're going to bring back Dr. Candace Steele-Flippin, who left us with the steps to keep our career in shape. We're going to ask Brianne to stick with us. We're going to ask Devonna Pittman to join us as well. And we are going to go to question and answer. Do any of you all have any questions for any of our panelists, and including Dr. Candace Steele-Flippin, about reckoning women of color, money, and the workplace? We'll see if I can open this up here. If you have any questions, feel free to load those to the Q&A function on the Zoom. And I guess I'll start with Dr. Candace. You gave us your steps to getting one's career in shape. What do you think is the biggest hurdle to that for women of color and the allies that are opening and creating spaces for us?
So in my research, what I've seen is some women don't have access to really good mentorship. And so they launch these great ideas and passions on their own. And a lot of times the people around them will project their own fears, so it squashes their dreams. And so to the extent that someone who's within your circle has an idea, that you can find a way to be encouraging and supporting it. And if you yourself have the ability to support and make a way for someone else, I find it to be very helpful. If your company or your organization has programs where you provide additional resources or support for women who are emerging on these activities, doing what you can to make them known is really helpful, and partnering with organizations that can amplify those efforts seem to be really helpful.
Now, we got a good question in the chat, and I'm going to ask all three of you this because you've all touched on this when you were talking. And this one is, how do you get what you're worth money-wise? It's very difficult depending on where you are in your career. So I want to get advice from you on this. Dr. Candace. And then we're going to go to Brianne and Devonna with how you've applied that type of advice in the past. So go right to it. How do you get pay equity? How do you encourage people to make steps towards that in this environment?
So I usually have a three-part answer to this when I speak, particularly with my mentees or even considering for myself. I think first you have to be open to the fact that you may not get it. So you have to reconcile, what you're going to do if the answer isn't what you want. The first thing is you want to do is to do the research. So fortunately today, there's a lot of online resources available either from the government or from sources like salary.com or Indeed, where you can actually find out what those salaries are for what you're doing. And some of these resources are actually free. You can also go to Glassdoor where you can see salary ranges, so you can get a sense of what people who do what you do make. And then you have to have the conversation, and the conversation with your manager and to make the business case to get your salary or your compensation aligned with your contribution. Sometimes you will encounter a very encouraging and supportive manager, and sometimes you won't. And so that's why I encourage people to go in knowing what will happen if you're not able to get what you need within a time frame that you need it. So while Nika is moving, maybe I'll pass the question over to Brianne.
Thanks. So I was just gonna, I had the three very similar pieces of advice. I actually do a salary negotiations webinar on this topic for my industry, for my professional association, because it's a huge issue, negotiating and asking for what you want. Do your research and then be direct. Go in and ask. Don't expect to get paid what you're worth if you don't ask. Ask for what you're worth and be direct and very to the point. I've been doing my research and I think I'm worth this. Pregnant pause. Super hard. You just want to fill that time. But also talking to your peers about what they earn is a very good piece of research. So I would just add that to what Dr. Candace said.
I want to curtail on both of those. I guess the question would be, can you give us an example exactly what you should say to a colleague so that conversation won't feel uncomfortable? And I guess we'll start with you, Brianne.
I've done it enough. I've done it a lot. It's awkward. Usually I start with people I know the best, or I'll say, how much do you think your supervisor makes? Or how much do you think your boss makes? Because then you're not asking them, how much do you make? But you're asking them the person's probably just a little bit above them. So they can go and they'll answer based on what they make. They'll say, oh, I think my boss probably makes whatever I'm making plus, and so that's a good tactic. What do you think your boss makes? Or just asking, what do you think a person in this job would make? But if I know them, I'll ask them directly, like, what do you make? So that I can really use that information. So I've emailed people I didn't know very well and asked them what they thought this position would be at. Again, people who are at that position. So it's basically like asking them what they make, but because you're not asking them that directly, it's easier. What would someone in a position like this make? And it's their position, right? So those are some tips.
So I've just asked.
And then I just want.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
So when I find myself in salary negotiations, I just ask my friends who are in my field, who would know, or my mentors, okay, what should I ask for? I remember probably 10 years ago, I ascended to a leadership role, and I called a former manager of mine who was an executive, and I said, okay, I have this great opportunity. What should I ask for my compensation? And he opened the kimono and told me everything. And I typed it up. And then, I use that as a basis. And anytime I've gone through something like this, I reach out to my network and I just say, okay, put it out there, because I know that there are people who have a school of thought that you kind of keep it closed, but I know that, and we've learned today, Pay Equity Day, that women are behind. And I may have lost out on $1 million of wealth creation for myself. So I've got to catch up, and I need all the knowledge I can. So I put my pride to the side so I can prepare myself to put myself in the best possible position.
You know, people are asking so many questions in the chat about how to navigate their finances in different points in their careers. And so what some of the participants may not understand is that we really do have everyone here in all different kind of age categories. We're getting questions around how you navigate one's finances in your 30s versus your 40s and your 50s. What do you have to say about that? And I'd like to bring Devonna into this conversation as well. How are we navigating throughout these different kind of age periods? So let's start with rapid fire, the 30s. What should one be doing from a financial standpoint in one's 30s? And how is that different when you're approaching your 50s?
Yeah, I think, there's so many different variables and people have different situations. I mean, if you have children, a lot of your money is going to go to taking care of them, making sure they're good, after school, curriculum, different types of activities. So, a lot of your money is going there. When you around 30 years old, you should really be thinking about what retirement looks like. Or, early 20s, mid 20s, but by 30, you should already know how much it is going to take for you to live your best life when you're at retirement age, whatever that looks like for you. So 60 years old, 62, 65, meeting with a financial accountant or a financial advisor to start to take a look at that path. How much money do I need to survive my 60s, my 70s, my 80s, and also take into consideration, what if I end up sick, or I can't take care of myself, or my husband is ill? What does that look like? So it looks different for everyone, but at the age of 30, you should start thinking about different scenarios and what retirement looks like in the next 20, 30 years.
I would offer,
Thank you.
this is Brianne, I'd offer that
Yes.
as we get older, we've been talking a lot about income and pay equity and wages, which is really critical. But as we get older, into our 40s and 50s, thinking about other forms of wealth and other forms of income beyond just pay is really important. And at Brooklyn Park, we are working with small businesses. We're also doing down payment assistance because we acknowledge and realize that the vast majority of middle wealth people are in their primary residence. So real estate is something to start thinking about when you get enough money where you're not living paycheck to paycheck, basically. And so I think expanding the conversation, talk about wealth, especially for women and women of color, that is just a space and a place that we do not have a lot of experience as wealth. So we need to fight for pay equity, because again, that $1 million, and that's what it is in the planning industry too. I've done the math. It's $1 million just over the course of one's career. In addition to that, though, there's other ways to build wealth and have passive income that we, as a demographic, just at least as women demographic, do not really tap into very often at all. Real estate, small business ownership. And then, of course, what Devonna talked about, your retirement fund, IRAs, 401ks, all of that.
I've found that it's difficult to do retirement planning in your 20s and 30s, and sometimes even in your 40s. And part of that is, for people in those demographics, you may not have ever had that conversation. You're trying to get through college, get your first job, you're living, maybe your company has programs, maybe it doesn't. So it's really hard to wrap your head around it. What I would encourage people to do is find your number. I can't tell you how many times, I probably had $1 for every time I've asked a financial planner, how much money do I need to retire? Like, how much? Like what is it? And no one could ever give me a number. And it was frustrating to me because I would say, you're my advisor, shouldn't you know? But it's always an individual decision. So I would say right now, there are so many resources online that are free that can help you figure out your number. Because I think that when people save, if you had asked me when I was 20, save $1 million, that was a hard thing for me to wrap my mind around. What was suggested to me was a percentage of my income, and it was framed to me like, you tithe 10% at church, certainly, if you're giving that back, what are you giving to yourself? And so find your number, whether it's a percentage or whatever it is, and just keep moving toward that. And then, as my brother said to me, then do a little more. That way
Do a little more.
you're always having momentum, because if you're living paycheck to paycheck, $20, $100, $50 seems a lot. And so I would say start where you can, and then as you do more, do a little more. And then when
That's
you figure out
wonderful.
your number, work with someone to put a plan in place so you can realize it.
That is wonderful advice. I have a follow-up question for you, because we talked a little bit about the importance of, trying to get to that pay equity, how to actually do it, and how to have the conversation with colleagues and friends. But I have another follow-up question as a multi-generational expert. Are there multi-generational issues with navigating that? Are there different expectations that different generations have? And how will that play into getting the pay equity that one needs and or deserves? And how do you know when it's time to move on?
Okay. So there's 3 questions. All right. So yes, so part of it is also life stage, right? So if you are a Gen Z, or you're 26 and younger, if you're 26, 27 and 41ish, 42ish, you're a millennial, and then goes up from there. So part of the life stage, remember that story I told you about when I was 23 and the advice that I was given? So there's certain generations of women who weren't really encouraged or educated to save. Like, their retirement plan, for better or for worse, was their spouse. And their spouse's income, and theirs was, complementary. And then what they learned over time is, in many cases, that may not have been the best plan for them. Millennials have a great saving history, because they watched what happened when they failed to launch in many cases because of the Great Recession, and they saw what happened with their family members, and same with Gen Z, and there are lots more ways to save now. So my hope is that for the younger generations, saving will be a much better practice for them. Also, for older generations, they have pensions, and other defined retirement plans that could support and augment it. But in terms of special needs, I would say that everyone should ask themselves 3 questions, particularly, as you look at your career. Do you have the career you need? Do you have the resources, the upward mobility, the lifestyle, like all those things? Does the career you have right now fulfill what you need? And if it doesn't, what's your plan to make it so? Do you have the career that you want? Is it the one that you aspire to? Is it starting your own business? Is it something that maybe you've thought about? Like, do you have that? And if you don't, what can you do, and who can you surround yourself with to help you make it so? And then number 3, do you have the career you deserve? Have you put in the time? Have you checked all the boxes that you were told? Have you did the training? Have you put programs in place that have been beneficial to your company or organization? And are you reaping the rewards of that? Be honest with yourself. And if you're not, what are you going to do about it? And I feel that can happen to you at any stage, at any generation, because a lot of times we never ask ourselves that question, or any of those questions. Are we getting what we need, what we want, and what we deserve?
And when we figure out the answers to those questions, what do we do next? Is it the answers that'll help us determine the next steps?
Yeah, I think it's the reflection on the question, and then the answers, and inviting people you trust into the conversation of what you do next to make it so.
And lastly, how do you engage or find those people that you trust? Sometimes people don't have the personal networks, or they're afraid to start the conversation. If someone's listening today who's a part of this conversation, how would you encourage that person? And I'll close, I'll start with you and then go to Brianne and Devonna with how, you know, they bring people into that circle. So first, how do you suggest one does that? Is that just a phone call, a lunchtime conversation? How do you do it?
Yes and yes. And then, start with the people you know and you trust. So whether it's someone in your immediate family, a friend, someone, at your church or other organization that you're a part of, and say, I want to have a serious conversation about my future. And I value and trust your opinion and guidance. And so I want to talk to you about some things that I've been thinking about, because I believe you'll give me your honest opinion.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Candace Steele-Flippen. Brianne Rothstein, how are you bringing people into that circle? What is your style and your approach in that? And it is my hope that someone who's listening today will be able to find their style and their voice in your approach. And so that's why I'm asking you this all as a closing question. Brianne, how do you bring people into that circle to get the advice that you're seeking and to ask oneself the 3 questions that Dr. Candace Steele-Flippen gave us?
Well, beyond talking with people and your peer-to-peer relationships, I think I prefer to have my work through policy. And so really advice is in that education and policy space. So whether it's personal education, educating yourself about the systems that you're working within, or whether it's about changing those systems. So that's advice that I have to the people listening is educate yourself and then seek to make the change that you want, whether that's pay equity for yourself or for others, whether it's policy at your organizational level or at your community level. It can be done. I think we get really frustrated when we watch the news. I actually got rid of my TV because I can't even watch the news. It's so demotivating. So, but to keep the optimism that Dr. Candace talked about earlier, and that we can change systems and we can affect the financial systems that affect us.
Thank you so much, Devonna Pittman. What is your style and approach to bringing people into the fold, into your circle of advice? Before we bring in back CEO and founder Tawana Black to close us out.
I don't know that I have that much more to add, but I will say that we all usually have the answer that we need. And asking other folks sometimes just really gives us the confirmation or the lack thereof. And we know that this conversation looks and feels very different sometimes for Black women. The Great Resignation cannot be defined by just one thing. It is dreams deferred, resources that were never available in the first place to people who are in businesses or people who are in the gig economy, or maybe just not even evident to those folks, to us. At the end of the day, you must have a reckoning with how you desire to impact the world, and you have to do that as your true and authentic self.
And that was the last word. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm bringing back CEO, founder, and visionary Tawana Black.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been great having all of you with us. I am so grateful to have each of these speakers have joined us on today for this opportunity to reckon with women, careers, and money. They reminded us that we have choices that we can make about what you need, what you want, what you deserve, and what you will do in order to get those things that you need, want, and deserve in order to build not only an inclusive regional economy and organizations that are racially equitable and inclusive, but to get those things that each one of us need, want, and deserve. What a powerful conversation. A big thank you once again to Brianne, Devonna, Dr. Candace Steele-Flippin, and certainly a big heartfelt thank you from me and the entire team CEI to Nika Constantino for being our guest moderator and host on today. What a powerful and amazing 90 minutes. I think I saw that in the chat, how quickly 90 minutes can go by. We want to say a big thank you to each one of you as well for joining us again for today's Reckoning to Rise series and for sharing it with your networks and for promoting this and sharing. I know several of you asked for the link to our YouTube page to be able to share this and watch today's Reckoning to Rise with your networks. Please do so. We also want to give you a few last reminders as we wrap up. Of course, we continue to share our partner Comcast, the Comcast Rise series, the opportunity for business owners to receive and compete for resources to help grow and encourage those businesses in our community to grow. So please do share the Comcast Rise opportunity for those businesses in our community to be able to grow and prosper and continue to expand jobs in our community. We also want to continue to give you the opportunity to use our regional economic indicators and dividends index so that businesses in our community can learn about the leading standards of racial equity, inclusion, and belonging in our communities. The index registration continues to be open until just the first week of April. So please do encourage your business, your employer, to take advantage of this index. You can go to our website to learn more and to register, and then be sure that you attend our upcoming summit that is coming up on June 21st. The summit comes back here. We are excited to be face-to-face on June 21st with all of you. Registration will open very soon, so save the date and watch your email to find out how to register, how to sponsor the summit, and how to engage with us on what will be the year's best conference on racial equity, inclusion, and belonging. Again, we say thank you for participating today. Stay tuned right behind this in order to get the link for our survey. Thanks again. Bye-bye.